Bannerman. Thank you so much. She's very creative. I am told that some of their designs will be available in our marketplace on the way to Wednesday. If you didn't have a chance to see it, you can. This is all about how we're mixing art and science and economics and finance. That this feeling that they all support one another, and that we are going to be more innovative, more creative, more productive if we start to think about how we can intertwine these things. So with that in mind, first, does everyone have a headset who needs it? If you need interpretation, please think about that now. But with that in mind, I'm going to introduce our opening act.
C'est bon l'effet de feu sur ta poitrine, oui, je le sais. Je sais qu'ils sonneront comme une alarme dans tes oreilles, oui, je le sais. Mais prends le temps de m'écouter. Prends le temps de lire à travers mes yeux ce que mes lèvres tentent de te dire et tu verras que je retiens mon souffle depuis fort longtemps. Et qu'à ce moment de ma vie et de la tienne, je me déchaîne pour qu'on survive, mais jusqu'à quand? Dis-moi jusqu'à quand allons-nous tenir?
Why are you asking these stupid questions? You already know the answer. Look around you. Well, if you want me to remind you something that you already know, well, let's do it. We are not going to make it. Look around you. There is nothing here. Nothing left. They took everything. Oh, yeah. I know what you are all saying, actually. Maybe things are going to be right. Like, it's going to be good. The same old song. It's never going to be good. Never. And they wonder why we don't do anything. I just want to be here and disappear.
Mais j'ai honte de voir mes semblables prospérer, les voir combler leur famille pendant que moi je me tourne les pouces en attente d'un certain miracle. Donc, ce soir, je partirai.
I'll be leaving this evening. Yes, I'm going to leave this evening. I could take the road, go to the Sahara, but by fear of being captured by some of my people. I was also my friend who went through the Mediterranean Sea. Don't cry. Don't cry. Because he suffered, sure. He suffered, but he made it in all safety. And look at the things he's done for his people, for his skin. I want to offer you better than this. I want you to enjoy. I want you to be proud. And I want to be proud of myself. So please, bless me. Please bless me so I can.
Et prie pour que je revienne.
You can pray that I come back. Leaving. I'm fed up.
Marre de ce désespoir. Voyez-vous, je me nomme Afrique. De mes entrailles baignent le pétrole, l'or, le diamant, phosphate et je passe. De ma culture,
You say it, you name it. And then self-help, bravery, piety, beautiful Africa. I am rich. My children are suffering. For decades, people have been singing my beauty, my wealth, my prosperity. I don't know what's happening to me. Why are my children suffering? Come close, come closer. What do you want? What are you looking for? Where are you going to? I'm aware it's not an easy thing to have a diploma and then be jobless. It's not an easy thing to have dreams and not to be able to make them come true. Why? Just because you don't have any money. But it's good to be dreaming because the future is ours. We are the youth of the world, youth of Africa, and together we'll be writing a new page. Investing in youth is investing for the future. We are the future of the world, a new page and a new history for this beautiful Africa. That's their dreaming.
Merci Mohamed, Aisha, Rahim, Maigai. Merci beaucoup. So, this, and may I invite our speakers now to come on stage. But as you come on stage for our next conversation, any reactions to that? I know that the interpretation was not happening at the beginning, but I think you could follow along, yes? Any thoughts? I won't call on you again, my dear. Any reaction? Don't ask me. How does it relate to some of the conversations we had yesterday? I should point out, by the way, that Mohammed and his group, it's a group of actors together. They created that piece for you. So that was their interpretation of what young people in Senegal are feeling about the future for tomorrow, about the tensions between staying and leaving, about being trained or not being trained. So as you reflect on that, we're going to get ready for the next conversation, but I will also take this moment to say we have some bumps in the road. We started a little bit late this morning. But has anybody here ever worked with clay? Ceramics. Anybody do ceramics or tiling, mosaic? Thank you. So if you work with clay, you know that you have to scratch the surface. You have to make it bumpy, because if it's too smooth, things don't stick. They don't stay together and they don't last. So let's keep that in mind, that we're having some scratchy surfaces at moments, but hopefully it's going to make things really stick and be quite memorable for us. So thank you for your understanding. Morgan, may I turn over to you, sir? Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. Can you hear me?
Very
Great.
well.
Good morning, and thanks to our actors and to Veronica for helping to set the stage. One thing we know about Veronica at IFC, so my name is Morgan Landy. I look after infrastructure at IFC in Washington. So I'm thrilled to be here in Dakar to help open up day 2. Please, as Veronica mentioned, we're going to be doing this opening session in French and English. So if you need translation, please make sure you have your translation box handy. And we thought we would take advantage of the great energy that started yesterday with the program, starting with the dance troupe in the morning, through the sessions, and the young entrepreneurs who are really so inspiring, all the way through the fashion show yesterday evening. And just think about this idea of partnerships. And this whole event really is about partnerships. Just looking around the room and looking at the list of guests and the list of speakers, and the artists and the actors and the bankers and the government officials and the civil society representatives, the academics. This whole event is about partnerships and how taking views from different angles helps us all to make better decisions, to make sure that we're dealing with the business aspects, but also the human aspects and the social aspects and the political aspects. And if you just deal with one, you're never going to be successful. So the whole idea about this event is about partnerships. So we're thrilled to start day 2 off with two gentlemen who are going to help talk about partnerships from their perspective, from very different angles. And we're very fortunate to have Minister Wargo, who's the advisor to the President and the Permanent Secretary of the High Council on Investment from the Niger Republic, from Niger. He's going to be joining us. We'll have a bit of a chat with him about how things look about partnerships in economic development from the perspective of the government of Niger. And then we have Paul Rollinson, who's the president and CEO of Kinross Gold, a large listed mining company in Canada, who is active in many countries around the world in the mining sector. And we'll have a conversation with Paul about how partnerships look from his angle. So we're really fortunate to have 2 very senior colleagues from very different walks of life with very different responsibilities in their current role talk about this idea of collective action and partnership and trying to make win-win solutions. So we'll start off the morning with a brief chat here to set the tone. Then we'll hand off to my colleague Fahim, who will continue the conversation with 2 other invited guests, and then we'll take the program from there. But really the session for today is about partnerships and how it takes more than one point of view to be successful. So, Minister, thank you so much for coming here and making the time. I know your English is flawless, as we spoke this morning over breakfast, but I understand you'll speak in French, so I'm going to get my little translation box out myself. So, Minister, maybe before we start, if you could just tell us a little bit about how you found your way to be in such an important position in Niger, advisor to the President, Permanent Secretary of the High Council on Investment of Niger. Is that what you wanted to do when you were a boy? You said, I want to grow up and be advisor to the President? Or how did you wind your way through your career to where you are today?
Thank you, Morgan. By the time you take your answer, I'm going to speak in French. Okay. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to Niger to speak them its mind out on this issue. Now, to answer your question, I have never dreamed in my life that I would work for the public service. When I was studying, there was what they called civil service in Nigeria, civic service, because there was a constraint of the government to hire the young folks coming on the labor market. So they had opened up a window to allow the youth to come as interns in the public sector, and some of us refused such a position because we didn't think it was fair. So we ended up in the private sector, where we've evolved for some 15 years in various positions. So I was in Dakar, and I received a phone call from the Chief of Staff of the President of the Republic. They said that we've been following you for some time now. Could you come in 2 days in Niamey because the President wants to see you? So I went, and he told me, look, I have established a High Council for Investment in Niger, and they're going to deal with all types of investments. So I thought that maybe you could be our men. So you go back to Dakar, you pack your stuff, and you come back to hold this position. So we've been pondering a lot, and I've talked to other people, and fortunately enough, when you have sketches like the one we just saw, where the youth don't have employment, I've experienced that after my studies, and somehow you can help settle that matter. I was really happy to go back to my country to take up this position of Minister Advisor and a permanent secretary of this High Council for Investments. This is my story. I want to help settle this issue for the youth, and I think we're on the right track.
When you think about this question of partnerships in your past career or in your current role, Niger, of course, is known for having very vast mineral resources, agricultural resources. How does the government think about partnerships and investment? And what is the priority from your perspective in this world of connecting with others to help the country develop?
Effectivement,
Niger is a very rich country when it comes to mine resources. Unfortunately, we do not know what we have in our soil. Niger is a very rich country when it comes to animal husbandry. We produce meat a lot, and our meat is one of the most favored because its quality is of the highest. When we were establishing our economic and social development plan, it was based on two pillars: transforming the rural world and developing the private sector, because we believe that private sector could be the driving engine of social and economic development of Niger. The government saw that the limited resources could not help us fast-track the activities and exploit all the potentialities in our country. So we brought on board the private sector because we believe that it's fundamental. And this justified the creation of the High Council for Investment, which would be the technical arm when it comes to structuring the projects to make the country more attractive for investors. So what we do to make sure that the private sector is our best partner to give this push to development is to prepare the environment, to make it friendly, to give them the necessary services for them to feel at ease in our country. So we started by improving the business environment in Niger, and today we are in a good position. If you look at the rating of doing business, we've gone up, and in some sectors we're one of the countries that have brought in the biggest reforms when it comes to improving the business environment. Now, the second thing is to see how to de-risk projects for the investors to be more attracted as far as guarantees, structuring are concerned. We talk about energy, road infrastructure, airports, hospitals. When you look back 5 years ago, we didn't have much infrastructures, and since then we've built 2 referral hospitals, 15 hotels that are being constructed. We also built roads, and we are structuring pipelines for exports, and we are structuring our pipeline for imports as well. So to be brief, the private sector is the ideal partner, and the business environment is very friendly for them. We've put in place a favorable legal framework, and we are trying to ensure physical security as well to support these investors who are coming to Niger. Thank you very much.
Very ambitious goals to attract the private sector and to help develop the country economically and socially. When you think about partnerships and you talk about the private sector, someone like IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank, what can we be doing ourselves, other like-minded partners, to really help bridge the gap and lead to the kind of investment you're looking for?
merci pour cette question.
Thank you very much for this question. We've been on it for 3 years now, and we're working intensively with some partners like IFC on sectors, and we also work on reforms, because regardless of what you see on ground, if governance is not adequate, it is difficult to attract private sector. So first of all, de-risking the business environment, and we have the support of IFC. Also, when it comes to infrastructure and mines, we have started discussions to see how IFC can help us better know what we have as resources in our soil. You know that Niger is the first country to produce uranium. We have oil, we have gold, we have iron. So we need to make this environment more attractive. We also have the sun, which is a resource, a valuable resource. We also have the resources to build dams. So with the involvement of partners such as IFC, we should be able to convince these investors. Having them on board is something that makes investors feel confident. So we're working hand in hand with IFC to be able to attract more investors. We'll work with Canescola on power plants projects and mining projects as well, and we'll try to make sure that we put in place the necessary reforms and better know what we have in our soil, and have second and third generation reforms when it comes to doing business, and that we are striving for with the World Bank and IFC and other development partners.
Here who work on these sectors, power, transport, mining, and we look forward to seeing how we can be supportive, both to attract investment and to think about connecting to the communities around the projects. So maybe I'll turn, Paul, to you to bring the perspective of Kinross. So before we get into the business, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, and did you always know you were going to end up being the CEO of a listed Canadian mining company? And what was your journey to bring you here to this seat today?
I grew up in Canada. I spent a lot of time in the outdoors. It's a big country, less developed. I developed a passion for being in the outdoors, fishing and camping and everything that you can do in Canada. And my interests in school were science and math. And so as I was growing up, I was looking for an opportunity to develop a career where I could use science, math, and be in the outdoors. And that led me to go to university. I became a geologist first. I worked all over Canada in remote regions, very remote regions all over Canada. And then it was a natural progression where I went from exploration, geology, searching, finding minerals, to I went back and I did mining engineering. So I have the geology and the mining, and over time, the more you spend at it, if you keep doing a good job, they keep asking you to do more. So that's how I ended up here today.
Great. Well, thanks for being here with us. And from the perspective of sustainability and the exchange, you know, one of the realities of the mining sector is that it really has a mixed reputation in the market in terms of sustainability, environmental protection, social concerns. Some of it perhaps deserved, and some of it perhaps not deserved. As a CEO of a major mining company, how does this resonate with you, and these environment, social governance issues? How do you think about partnerships to really make sure that you're having the impact you want to have?
Sure, and I think the focus is critical, and I think there has to be a constant pressure to get better. For us, it starts right on the ground wherever we are, and I think, as you alluded to in the outset, we're in North America, South America, Africa, and Russia. So we're in 4 continents, many countries, many languages. And it starts right on the ground where we operate. And it's got to be part of everything we do day to day in your local communities. The way we drive it is really we have policies, and we have four, core principles. Number one, do no harm. What does that mean? Safety of our employees is absolutely number one. People have to go home safe. Number two, environmental standards, and we're trying to operate at the highest environmental standard wherever we are in the world. Number two, make a positive contribution. So wherever we are in the world, we're trying to employ as much as possible. Locally, we're trying to use local businesses. So the benefit of our being in that particular community or region is noticeable and felt. Number three, it's really about your conduct and making sure that you're obeying the law, high business standards, human rights standards. All of that has to be unassailable, and you're operating at the highest level. And then the last point, again, is this continuous improvement. There's regulations, but you shouldn't be living by just the regulation. You should also be looking at how you can be better because it's the right thing to do. And we've launched some recent initiatives in different parts of the world which we just think will help us. And all of that leads to transparency. So if you're doing all those things, you should be proud of that, and we are. Talk about it, report it. So we put all of that in a CR report. We're very proud of it. The CR report gets published biannually, and you'll see if you go on our website, we look for independent review. Last year we won an award from the World Wildlife Fund for highest environmental standards and transparency at our operations in Russia. And again, the transparency is important. Wherever we operate, it's important we let people visit the site. We have reach outs to indigenous communities, and we have a lot of communication and visibility, and we're looking for feedback.
Great. And talking about communications, we had yesterday in some of the sessions, there was a question asked about balancing stakeholder constituencies between investors. Of course, you have investors to take care of, and communities and the environment and government officials and regulators and all these different interests, and you're kind of at the center of it as the company trying to run a sustainable business. How do you think about it, Kinross, balancing these issues and trade-off between profitability, sustainability, communications? Do you communicate too much? Is there such a thing as communicating too much? How does this all sit from where you're looking?
No, I don't actually think there is an issue of communicating too much. I think the more transparency, the better, quite frankly. And you're right, there are competing groups of stakeholders, and there's lots of expectations, and it can be a challenge to balance all of those expectations. And really the only way to come at it is through transparency and measuring and reporting. And so a lot of the work we do, we make sure that we publish it. In terms of balancing those expectations, again, an objective of ours is to do as much as we can in the communities where we operate. So when we look globally, 70 to 80% of the materials that we would require, we try to source locally. What does that mean? That's about a $2 billion per annum spend in the regions we operate. We're also very strong believers in your employment being in the local region, and I'm again proud to say our average for all those countries around the world is 98%. 98% of our employees are locally sourced. And then in terms of your activity, we do a lot of work with third parties to measure what are we doing. We've done work with the UN to look at what we're doing in, for example, Brazil. And what are we actually contributing? And our mine in Brazil is immediately adjacent to a town. Sometimes we're in a very remote location. In Brazil, we're right beside a town of 80,000 people. We've done a lot of work on what are we doing to contribute to literacy, education, medical. And we've got pretty good third-party data that says our contribution is demonstrating that community is benefiting and growing more than the state and the country. And we do that in other places around the world.
Great. Maybe one last question, Paul,
Sure.
then I'll come back to the minister for a wrap-up. I'm getting a signal that it's time to move to phase two of the opening. So, Paul, in terms of the investor world,
yes.
there's a lot of talk in the market about impact investing and ESG investing. Even IFC, we've come out with our own impact investing principles earlier this year, trying to galvanize common language around what is impact investing and how do we account for it. From your perspective, do you see impact investing or ESG investors interested in the mining sector, and how does that play in your calculation about investor relations?
Yeah, we do. We actually, and I would say it's increasing, and I'd say that's a good thing because, again, as I said at the outset, I think that positive, trend towards more transparency on ESG is good for the industry. And so in any particular year, I'll meet hundreds of investors through the course of the year, which is your more typical sort of portfolio manager type investor. But we do have an active shareholder outreach on governance and ESG alone. So not so much about the profitability of the operation, but what are you doing? And that's a very good, rigorous process. We take the feedback, we report that feedback up to our board, and that allows us to modify our activities and our programs and to communicate and be more transparent.
Great. So I think that's something we'll see more and more of in the future.
I absolutely believe you will.
And I think one of the things we see at IFC is this idea of information. Right now, in many ways, there's too much information in the world. And the question is, how do you have good information and reliable information, and what are the definitions we use for impact and ESG?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of work to be doing there that we're going to try to influence and try to help at least have standards.
Standards are
so
good,
everyone knows what we're talking about when it comes to these issues. So thanks for your answer on
Thank
that.
you.
So I'm going to ask one last question for both of our panelists, and then we'll move to the next session. Mr. Minister, in terms of partnerships, in your just a quick observation, what are the key ingredients for successful partnerships? And what would make a partnership fail?
Before answering to your questions, I would like to say that countries like Niger, where we have more than 75% of the population which is aged below 25 years old, 75% of our population, I repeat, where we have everything that is needed to give them employment, but unfortunately they don't. This raises the issue of partnership, be it with institutions such as IFC, multilateral development institutions, private entities, and the government. We should join forces so that together we can explore these potentialities and make use of them, leverage on these potentialities for this youth of ours to be living better in our country. So what should we do together to have the adequate conditions? First of all, we need to have common objectives. The private partner is looking for profit, of course. He's looking for profitability of his business. He needs instruments and mechanisms, be it legal or financial instruments, to protect himself and have a return on investment that is quite substantial. So the government should be prepared, should prepare for such a legal framework. Development institutions should also know how to bring on board these financial instruments and the necessary funding for the private sector to put in practice its expertise. Secondly, we do not have any time to waste. There are some success stories, and we should leverage on the leapfrogging to create the environment that would be friendly for our youth to develop. I'll share an anecdote with you. In Niger, we organized a sort of contest to recruit gendarmes, and some young people came for the exams, and they were not in good conditions to be successful. For instance, for the running part of the contest. They didn't have the physical conditions to run, so some of them didn't succeed. So let us work together to make sure that our youth stays in our countries and do not take the Mediterranean Sea.
Partnership, and what makes a failed partnership?
Sure, and I agree with a lot of what the minister said. And again, it's transparency, it's rule of law, and it's stability. And I agree. I mean, private enterprises are really representing investors, and often that investment is coming in, and there can be a long lead cycle, exploration, development, construction. And the return of capital on the investment can take many, many years. So what's important is, as you go through that investment cycle, sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 years, things are stable, things are transparent, and the rules don't change. There's an old saying, when you think about investors and capital, and the saying is, capital is a coward. And what do I mean by that? At the first sight of uncertainty, it runs away. So the way to attract capital and get more investment and more development and more jobs is stability, transparency, and consistency with rule of law. And my points earlier, I think, as a private enterprise, if we bring everything that we should for the right reasons for the people, our social contribution, I think that constitutes a good partnership for future development, and it's a good situation for both the investor and the host environment. We're always mindful that we're a guest in someone else's country, and if you're a guest in someone else's country, you've got to be respectful and obey that rule of law, and it's got to be a balanced situation for both parties.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add from where I sit, what I've seen at IFC, both on the investment side, where I'm now, and I spent some time on the environment and social side, the key thing for success in our organization is trust. So whether it's trust between our investment team and our credit team, or our legal team and our board, or our clients and ourselves, it really comes down to, if you cut away all of the different iterations, trust. And how do you build trust? It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So I think trust, is a product of continued patterns of behavior and people getting to learn that they can believe what someone's saying is correct or not correct. So it's tough to do quickly, but I think over time, trust being developed, in my view, is the best ingredient for partnership. So please join me in thanking our colleagues for joining us, and we'll hand over now to Fahim. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so
Veronica, back
much,
to you.
Minister Paul Rollinson Morgan. I'm going to invite our next group of speakers to come on up. Now we have some additional government perspectives on partnership, but what I really appreciated about this is already this morning, from the youth, from the minister to Paul, I mean, people are experiencing different realities, and even when they have great intentions and have a shared goal, they're experiencing every day differently. And as Morgan said, it takes a long time to create that shared experience and that trust. So thank you so much, Morgan. And Fahim, our country manager for Senegal and several other countries, may I turn over to you? Thank you.
Hello? This is working. Bonjour, good morning, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fahim Aliboy, and I'm IFC's country manager for Senegal, Mauritania, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Cape Verde. I'm one of your many IFC hosts for this year's sustainability conference, but I would like, in the name of the 105 IFC staff based here in Dakar, to wish you a warm welcome again to our fair city on the Atlantic, Dalal Jam. So I'm delighted this morning to be joined by two friends, actually, Lise Filiatro, who's Canada's ambassador to Senegal, and Tatsuo Arai, who is the Japanese ambassador to Senegal. Very diplomatic. We have the fortunate situation to have three nationalities represented here, Japan, Canada, and Pakistan. And as I spoke to both ambassadors last week about a very important issue of protocol, as we discussed this section, in what language should we speak? So we checked with Veronica. Unfortunately, there's no Japanese.
The topic of this today's session, and looking at my background, you see, I've read microbiology and environmental science at a time when it was not quite common. It was a long time ago, so to speak. And this is interesting because later on, I studied international relations, what they called global affairs in Canada. And I've been working in Cameroon, in Guyana, in Chile, Cuba, and now Senegal. And there's a common thread in all these countries. All of these are very wealthy or rich countries in terms of natural resources, which is not by accident because in all of these countries I've been working on issues of the sustainable use of resources, and I found that ecology and international relations go together quite well. Because in both cases, we're trying to find balances in relations that exist naturally in the environment. This is true for nature, it's true for the countries, but it's also true for relationships between ourselves, for human relationships. Thank you, Fahim. Thank you, Liz. I'm quite happy to be here. I'm not really accustomed to this 360-degree arrangement. I got to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the 80s, and ever since then, I've been in 3 continents. In the African continent, I've been here in Dakar for only 9 months. I think I did Egypt and Kinshasa. But in Europe, I was in France for 3 years, and in America, in Quebec, Mexico. So now the only missing country is Japan, in Asia. I can say that I speak Japanese very well, but thank you very much. Actually, the topic this morning is partnerships. Partnerships with countries, governments, but also the private sector. And I'm aware that in Canada and Japan are well known for partnerships, very strong and sustainable partnerships in all of the countries where they intervene. How do you identify your partners, organizations, but also countries? What do you think about your global partnerships, especially in the field of climate and sustainability? Let's start with you, Liz. Okay, maybe I'd like to go back to principles and take up some of the ideas that were mentioned during the first panel. I think in our partnerships, whether with organizations or countries, Canada looks at in the long run. It's been said it is important to have a long-term common vision, to be constant and consistent in our partnerships, and to do so in a sustainable way. Sustained partnerships
you're not flexible in it. So being, having a long-term vision and being consistent doesn't mean that you don't have to adjust and adapt as you go along. So I think it's a mix. It's a balance between being flexible, but at the same time being engaged for the long run. I think also that we look at shared goals. Obviously, we have to have a common goal in order to be partners together, as well as shared values. I think that also is increasingly important. And again, you can have shared goals and shared values, but you can also have very complementary skills that you bring to the partnership. And that makes it for a success, in my view.
Ambassador Rai?
Yes. So probably Japan, how to advance partnership with others. Probably by talking about a TICAD, it will be well explained. Because the TICAD meeting, it's a Tokyo International Conference for African Development. So Japan, we started this framework in 1993. So this is a pioneer framework for discussion on African development. And the key concept is inclusiveness and openness. So we include all the stakeholders, African countries and international organizations and the civil societies and others. So it's open. And how do we proceed? This first ownership. So ownership of African countries and partnership with international community. So that's what we have been encouraging. And this year, in August, we will have a seventh TICAD meeting in Japan. And we put three priority areas. First, economy. Second, society. Third, peace and stability. So in each priorities, we encourage and we promote partnerships. For example, for the economy, so we promote public and private dialogue and partnership, and also for the social area, we promote the participation of private sectors, among other things. So that in this way, we promote bilateral partnership and multilateral partnership with respect to Africa in the case of TICAD. But in other areas, of course, we promote a partnership like G20 will be held this year in Japan. So to tackle with economic issues in the worldwide.
Thank you. I mean, TICAD is definitely something that's very well respected, and the fact that it is very continuous, I think, is testament to how well received it is. I'd now like to turn to, and I think you touched upon this, Ambassador Rai, is that both Canada and Japan have been, I think, excellent partners to the development finance institutions in general and IFC in particular. I particularly remember actually about 8-9 years ago working on a project that was using the Canadian climate funds, actually. And just to know that that pot of money was available and could help do innovative things. In this case, it was a global lighting fund based out of East Africa. And I also know that the Japanese have been involved in quality infrastructure. There's a quality infrastructure facility. And it's actually funding something very relevant here in Senegal, which is a study on LNG, given the important oil and gas resources that we've found here. How have you found working with development finance institutions, the broader financial community, and maybe even IFC in particular? Any feedback?
Sure. Well, I think there's now a clear recognition, especially since the SDGs, les Objectifs de Développement Durable, that in the case of the African continent, for example, and the Minister of Niger talked about it very clearly, that the continent needs investment, it has growth, it needs to create jobs in order to really take advantage of this youth population and the wealth that the continent has. But in order to make that happen and bring about inclusive development, you need, obviously, different partners that have different skills. And I think that for Canada, the experience with IFC was a very positive one, where we were able to innovate by bringing each our ingredients to the sauce, let's put it this way. So we were looking for new ways of blending financing, bringing new partners together. In Canada, with our development expertise, we were very interested in inclusion. Canada is a diverse country, and we felt we had something to offer on that front. Gender equality is a big priority for Canada. At the same time, climate change, there was a big recognition that there were issues with climate change and that we wanted to look at renewable energy, for example. And on the other hand, IFC had all the expertise about working with the private sector, working in risky environments. And when you mix that together, you get very good results. And I just wanted to give a few examples. In Guinée, alors, un des pays que je couvre à partir d'ici, c'est la Guinée-Conakry. Et donc, on a fait un partenariat avec IFC où on...
In the partnerships with IFC, we have an online platform where users and suppliers can meet on a platform. So small-sized businesses can generate some procurement, and they can. It's a subcontracting stock exchange. And so this is an example, you see, an approach that takes into consideration gender and which also generates resources for the community, but also profit for the private sector. In Côte d'Ivoire, we worked with a women's association in the mining sector. It also exists, such type of associations in Senegal. It's to generate businesses that are run by women. I'm also thinking about an initiative that we've only just launched with IFC and Canada, the Africa Energy Forum. It is a toolkit for the gas and oil and mining sector to better incorporate gender equality, to look into how diversity within businesses, on the boards, but also on the ground in the mining industry, how we could incorporate these dimensions, not just because there's social benefit and economic benefit. I've seen that in Senegal, in the mining industries, for instance, where they use women to drive huge machines because women have a good maintenance for their equipment. Thank you, Louise. Liz.
Yeah, we believe that multilateral development banks are our very important partners, and in particular in the context of quality infrastructure. So we promote, and quality infrastructure, of course, for the sustainable development, each country need infrastructure, but with the quality. And already in 2016, at the moment of G7 summit, which was held in Iseshima, Japan, G7 leaders defined several principles for quality infrastructure. And one is economic efficiency of life cycle cost. It's not a short term, it's a long term cycle cost you need to consider. And and also social environmental consideration, local development strategy. You need to be in line with those strategies and plans. And also you have to think about local job creation and technology transfer. So those principles were defined. But another principle, very important, is effective resource mobilization. So how to finance those infrastructure of quality. by not just the government money, but also PPP or multilateral development banks, including IFC. So in this way, you can maintain that sustainability to go, long-term policy. So with IFC,
with IFC here in Senegal, we have achieved a research project on energy management. It's original and it's a very good example of our relationships with the private sector, with the IFC.
Theme in the development world is how do we leverage the private sector? How do we use government funds as a base to then attract and have a multiplier effect? And both the programs you've mentioned, I think, are very, very important in doing that, putting that risk capital forward that to bring in others. So just maybe one last theme before we move to the end. It's striking the balance. How do we maintain that equilibrium? I think both Japan and Canada are also known for their very strong industries, actually, as well as their focus on innovation, very strong power sectors, natural resource sectors in your case. Canada has obviously very resource-intensive companies in logging, in mining. Japan, heavy industry, companies with large CO2 emissions, for example. And at the same time, both your countries are very advanced and forward-thinking about climate, about renewable energy. How have you struck this balance at home? And what lessons can you bring to other countries? Hier, on a trop parlé d'équilibre.
Yesterday, we talked a lot about balance. How can businesses remain profitable, competitive, but how can they also work with the country where they are? So how do Japanese or Canadian companies position themselves in Africa and other emerging countries?
I think the diversity of viewpoints in the end will bring together, will work through those dynamic tensions to come up with the best model. I mean, you talked about the diversity on the panel, and I think it brings richness to it. It's a bit the same thing. So at home, yes, we have those dynamic tensions as well. And to me, it's over time with dialogue and with a platform to allow those partners to come together and share perspectives that you can manage these dynamic tensions. So for example, the government, the public sector, has the role of creating the enabling environment. And I'll give a few examples in terms of public policies. Of course, we now have environmental impact assessments in our countries. Those are processes that allow those discussions to happen. You have also, now in Canada, for example, we have code for responsible conduct of business, what we used to call corporate social responsibility, which now we talk about a responsible conduct of doing business. And the president, the CEO of Kinross talked about that, about being transparent. The EITI is an example, a transparency, where the government can create that environment. The Minister of Niger talked about that as well. Then you have the private sector, and the private sector, I think, also increasingly is looking at the longer term and the impact. Yes, return on the investment, but social returns as well, because it makes sense and you need social acceptability. And I think the private sector can bring the capital, of course, but also the technology. And there are technologies that can respond to some of the demands of the communities. And then you have the communities and that are interested in local development. So but they want to participate in it. So that's where you have the local procurement. That's where you have the training also, and that's where governments can be helpful also in partnering with the private sector and make sure that the right skill set is there. So I think it's really a combination of those conversations and also sharing information and sharing perspectives. And I'll give one example quickly of a toolkit we developed here in Senegal working with natural resource Canada and working with our partners in Senegal. Because in Senegal, the mining industry is a fairly new sector, and so there was a need to explain how does a mining cycle works, and so we were able to develop this toolkit of information that allows for those conversations to take place, that allow for the facts to be public, to be made public, so that everybody can participate in a meaningful way.
Bon, merci. Donc,
Thank you. Japan has some experience, some challenging experience. I mean that in the 60s, economic growth was very significant. It was some 10%. But then, afterwards, we started suffering from environmental degradation. On top of that, in the 70s, we had two oil shocks. So, the Japanese industry had a real hard time. But we did lots of endeavors to overcome this situation and this very high cost of oil. And so we did a lot to save energy and to have the maximum efficiency in our industry. So we've invested, and we came back to a growth, but not 10%, but it was quite significant. So we struck a balance between environment and development at international level. In 1997, we adopted the Kyoto Protocol, which was the fundamental text to face climate change. And after, there was the Paris Convention, 2015. So, and in June, the government of Japan has only just adopted its long-term strategy for growth based on the Paris Convention, that is to say, considering the climate change elements. The idea, the basic idea, is to face climate change. It's not because of the cost, the economic cost or the opportunity cost to get to sustainable development. So we have defined a strategy using innovation. Innovation is important to make progress on these issues. Our future goal is to have a free carbon society. That's our ultimate goal. But we move forward with international partnerships. This year, the government of Japan has announced the holding of a meeting during the Innovation Summit. We shall look into the modalities to do so.
About the positioning, how to position Japanese enterprises with respect to emerging or African countries. We have promoted a free, open Indo-Pacific oceans. So considering that Africa with a lot of potentials and Asia growing quite rapidly. So by connecting two continents, we can reach international prosperity and stability. So for doing that, rule of law, of course, is important, but economic prosperity by building a quality infrastructure, but always with the participation of private sector, including Japan and local economies, African economies.
Merci pour ces partages.
Thank you for this sharing. It is important that we share the lessons learned. So thank you. I think I'm going to try and close somehow. I believe, like I said at the beginning, Japan and Canada are very good at partnerships. Now, how did you manage to develop strong partnerships?
Ça, c'est la question que j'ai.
That's my question.
Advice that you could share with the audience as you close.
I would say very, very simple things. Take the time to build the relationship. Take the time to get to know your partners and at the personal level, professional level, and at all level in the organization, and know what the partner can bring to the mix. I think the ambassador talked about innovation, and I think we all recognize that statu quo is no longer possible. There are big challenges out there. If you take energy, for example, it's clear that this is a very serious bottleneck. The continent needs energy. At the same time, we're faced with issues, environmental issues and climate change. So why not looking into clean technologies and clean energy? And I'll give to end the example of the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, in which Canada is partnering with IFC and with other countries to, so I think we need to, let's not be afraid of bringing together things that may look as contradictory, but in the end, if you innovate, you will actually get a better solution, because you will find new technologies, you will bring different partners that will bring blended financing, and that will bring about the best that countries and know-how can offer, which is, you know, interesting technological solutions. And the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative is a good example of that, where you de-risk, where different partners bring different things to the mix, whether it's you know, the integration of a gender perspective or a technology with wind or with solar and financing. And if you bring all that together, then you may be surprised about what you're going to get. Voilà.
So, thank you.
Your secret sauce.
Maybe our secret is we have no secret. So to develop well in partnership with others, on the framework or networking level, we put a lot of emphasis on inclusiveness and openness. So to get together and to discuss together. So everybody is welcome. And on the ground level, for implementation, we consider very important technology transfer through human resource development. So recipient countries and donor stakeholders are on the equal footing. So it's not the teacher and students. So both direction, through interactions, we learn a lot and we develop a lot. One technology, for example, is transferred and applied on the ground. So you need to understand very well the local situation. In this way, the technology will be improved. So both directions are quite important, and you could say it's a win-win partnership. And in this way, so we can reach our final target of TICAD, ownership and partnership. So to harness ownership by recipient side with the international partnership. So that's the way we are doing.
Thank you for these words of wisdom. I mean, if I could just add, I think one thing that we've seen work is staying the course. I think Paul mentioned earlier that sometimes capital can be a coward and run away. I think at IFC, what I've seen, especially being on the ground here in West Africa, is that once we come, we stay. We build a presence on the ground. We continue the relationships. Yes, there might be times where you scale up and scale down, but we don't leave. And we keep the engagement going. We build that trust that you talked about. And I think staying the course can often be the way to keep those partnerships alive through the ups and downs. So thank you both for your time this morning, for what you've shared with us. And to the audience, bonne continuation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fahine and ambassadors. That was, woo, safety first. I want to introduce Pablo up again, and we're going to pass a little bit of sweetness to re-energize you. Pablo, please, sir, you have a couple minutes.
A couple of minutes means 2 minutes. I hope they give me 3. Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. Here's what we're going to do. You have 30 seconds to stand up, find a partner, and place yourself back to back with your partner. Shoulder to shoulder. Ready, set, go. 30 seconds. Stand up, find a partner. Back to back. Excellent. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. If you don't have a partner, come to the front. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop and silence. May I borrow you, sir? You come here, yes. So here's what you're going to do. If you can't see the front, rotate until you both can see this center stage. Otherwise, look at the screens. Back to back. So, are you familiar with the game rock, paper, scissors? Do you think that is a good game to teach collaboration and partnerships? No, it's bad. It's about squashing the other. You're trying to crush the scissors with the paper. You're trying, it's bad for collaboration. That's what we are taught all the time. Squash your partner. This is going to be a different rock, paper, scissors. Can you all show me your rock? It's evocative of mining, right? Can you all show me your paper? It's like government writing documents on laws. Can you all show me your scissors? Private sector trying to cut deals. Okay. This is what we're going to do. When I say ready, set, go, at the word go, each one of you is going to turn around and do one of those 3 gestures looking into the eyes of your partner. Shh. No talking. You have to try to match your partner. You don't have to beat your partner. You have to do the same gesture as your partner. Shh, no talking, no strategizing. Ready. Important. If you match, you go yes and clap your hands with your partner. If you fail, you have only one more try. Self-organized, you go back to back and you say to yourself, ready, set, go, and you try to match. Are you ready? Set, go. Yes! Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo. I never thought about that before. That when we play rock, paper, scissors, we're not teaching our kids to collaborate. It's like a whole insight for me about my childhood and how I'm teaching my children. We should have a whole session just on childhood games and the long-lasting effects. Thank you, Pablo. So lucky for you, there are these beautiful dulces being passed. I don't remember exactly the name in French, but there's cookies coming around. And I have the great pleasure to introduce now Adil. Where are you, Adil? Here he is. Adil, our senior manager for Latin America and the Caribbean. Take it away.
We're going to get you mic'd up.
Keep going. Everybody keep talking.
Okay.
There you go.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. I would add to that, bon dia, konnichiwa, ni hao, because there's so much diversity in this room. But there's one thing that I feel we all share, is that we all, most of us grew up in cities. Most of us live in cities. And the cities that we live in shape who we are at some level. It determines the quality of life, the city that we live in. And there are the forces of urbanization, there's demographics that is driving us more and more people to live in cities. More people living in cities at this point in history than any other time. As people move into cities, I think there are challenges, but within each challenge are opportunities. And we wanted to share with you this session to talk about challenges, opportunities, technology, design, policy, and partnerships. And we have a terrific panel here today to talk about that. But before I dive into that, I wanted to share with you something from the region that I represent, which is Latin America and the Caribbean, one of the most urbanized regions in the world, and from the city of Bogota in Colombia, which is one of the most dense, not a very big city, but one of the most dense cities in the world. A city where some of the most poor people live on the hillsides around the city. And getting to work from the hill down to where the city is takes you about an hour. Hour just to get down so you can catch a bus to go to work. And can you imagine the quality of life, spending 2 hours going up and down this area? From a poor neighborhood to a city that you can probably see from your house down below, and wondering what the quality of your quality of life is and what the quality of life is of people that are other people living in that city. How does that make you feel? And I wanted to share with you a story because the mayor of Bogota, who's been one of the more innovative people in terms of urban design, and famously came up with the first large-scale bus rapid transit system in the world, which was then taken to other places, decided to put in a world-class piece of infrastructure, a cable car that brings those people from the hill down to the city in 13 minutes. In 13 minutes. So you're giving people back roughly 2 hours of their lives every day by putting this infrastructure in. But also think for a minute, you take the poorest part of the city and you give them a piece of infrastructure which is world-class. I mean, this is a cable car that could be anywhere in Europe. Beautiful piece of infrastructure in the poorest part of the city to serve the poorest people of that city. How does that make them feel? And it makes them feel good about themselves. It makes them feel proud of where they live. And that, to me, captures what we do with infrastructure. We can give people hope. We can give people pride in where they live. We can give people time. We can actually give people time and improve their quality of life. So in this session, I think we're going to talk about technology. We're going to talk about policy and partnerships. And for technology, we have with us Marco Pedrasso. I hope I got that right. Who is an architect, an engineer, focusing on technology, urban planning, and design. Marco works in a beautiful city in Turin, and I'd like to invite him on stage.
Thank you very much for the introduction. The name was perfect.
Perfect, okay.
Does the microphone work? I want to spend 30 seconds to thank the IFC and all the organizers for giving me this opportunity being here and the trust to be able to speak to all of you in this session. I have to say that I'm always a little bit emotional when with this kind of audiences, and I spoke to many of you, and one by one you're all wonderful people, but all together you can be pretty intimidating, so bear with me for 10 minutes. My domain is smart city design, so I want to talk through 3 key points today. What is a smart city? What is a smart city? How is that different from a sensible city? And what can we do with it? And I want to also close with what are the opportunities for city governance and local governance that's gonna follow in the panel. What could be the opportunities that they can grab within this ever-changing landscape of technology within the city? So without further ado, let's take a step back and see how people were seeing the digital revolution at the dawn of it. At the beginning of the advent of the internet, people started questioning what was the value of our cities, what was the value of space, what was the value of places. If I can communicate with you on the other side of the planet, if I can work with you in video conference and be constantly connected, what is the value of being together? And therefore, what is the value of the city, which is, by definition, the place in which we get together? Up to the point that Gilder, an economist, dared to say that the cities were headed to death. They were just leftover baggages of the industrial era. The digital space would have killed the physical one. Now we know that story didn't went that way. Actually, cities are thriving like never before. 2008 was a milestone in humanity. It was the first moment of the history of humanity in which 50% of the population was living in urban area. Never happened before, and the trend is keep on growing, and we experience that every day, especially in emerging economies. So what happened? What we see happening is that actually this digital space basically blanketed our cities. It covered every aspect of life, and create a whole new space in the middle, which is the domain of connected object, in between the physical and the digital. And in perspective, to some extent, we could think at a world in which every single atom, it's also a little bit of a bit that communicates data and it's connected with the rest of the world. So what can we do with all this digital domain? What can we do with all this data? Just think for a second. In the last 2 years, humanity produced 90% of the data that the humanity has ever produced, including the Hammurabi Code, the Bible, all the songs ever written, all the poems ever written, up till 2 years ago. That's massive. Like 90% in the last 2 years, and the trend is keep on going. So we're producing more and more data. What can we do with that? Well, we can say we can build a smart city, but actually, I want you to reflect for a second. How many of you have used Google Maps once landed at the airport? Question, raise your hands. Okay. How many of you checked on the internet what were the key places in the car to visit? So you are in the smart city, in a way. Like, the digital layer is already affecting the way in which you experience the city. And it's true wherever we go. So data can produce, if correctly used and given back to the hands of citizens, data can produce behavioral change, and that's what we want to do. We want a smart city to empower smart citizens. That's to me the definition of what a sensible city is. It's a city that's able to understand what are the needs of its citizens and use data, the digital layer, to provide them these kind of services. So how can we do that? I think that the first key point is visualizing. In the moment in which you look on Google Maps, you're just visualizing data. There's no additional service provided. There's no additional goods exchange. You're just seeing what is the best route to go from where you are to where you want to go. And if there's traffic in between, that's also a good feature. And it could be the same with trash. In MIT, they studied a couple of years ago, they started mapping where the trash is going from the moment in which we put it outside of our door. In the moment in which citizens in these experiments started seeing how long it'll take to the things that they were trashing to end up in a recycling facility or in a dump, they started wondering, wow, maybe I should be more careful. Maybe I should avoid using plastic bottles when I can. Because in the moment in which you see something, your behavior starts to change. Second thing we can do with that is actually optimize. Think about transportation. In the moment in which we started visualizing the pattern of pickups and drop-offs of taxis, we started wondering, wow, maybe we can optimize the route of traffic. And that's exactly the algorithm that Uber Pool now uses in the major city, but it's a matter of taking the step further from visualization to optimization. We have a lot of unused or underused assets within the city that we can definitely optimize. And I want to bring you also one example from my personal experience. We designed a building in Turin, which is my city in Italy, in which we started wondering, because of local problem and the specificity of that building, we started thinking, why are we heating and cooling a whole building? Why cannot we optimize where actually people are? Heating is not for the walls and the air. Heating is for people. So we designed a system that was actually tracking where people were inside a building and just heating and cooling where they were. Nice feature also, like everybody could set his own temperature, so we stop the thermostat war within our offices, but that's aside. So we said visualize, optimize. Third thing, which is the most tricky one, it's future-proofing. Ideally, we want to build structure that will last for the next 100 years. In that respect, it's tricky because technology is accelerating and changing at a rhythm that's 6 months. Everybody gets bored with the previous technology on your car and on your phone. So in that respect, why shouldn't we conceive structure as something modular, something multi-purpose, and something retrofitable, in which the main core structure, think about a building, the main core structure stays there for 100 years. Mechanical, electrical plants can be updated every 25, facade can be updated every 20, and interior can be fitted in 5. That's possible. I'll live with this because I already ran over time, but I wanted to live with, as a designer, I wanted to live with a quote from Alan Kay. There's no real way to forecast what's going to be the future in our cities. The only way to predict the future is actually try to invent in it. And with this, I thank you all.
Thank you, Marco. I think for the next session, I'd like to invite our panel. We have today people representing 3 cities, Lagos, Dakar, and Cordoba, the second largest city in Argentina. I'd like to invite Dr. Olofemi Salam, who is the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Transport of Lagos. Please join us on stage. Mr. Abdoulaye Sile, who is the head of the Urban Studies and Programming Division, looks after urban planning, climate change issues. Welcome. And Roque Spedalieri, who is the Secretary of Finance for Cordoba, dealing with raising money in a very challenging macro environment. And to lead the discussion, to moderate it, Lisa De Silva, who is the IFC Global Lead for Cities, and really a pioneer in helping establish our franchise in Africa.
Thanks, Adil. I wanted to start by saying thanks to Marco. I think he did a good job in letting us know the complexities that cities are working in today, right? There's technological change, people have been talking about climate change, and governments have to think about the future. What I want to focus our discussion on right now is how do cities go from the vision that they have to bring better lives to people into choosing the solutions that they're going to implement, and how do they implement those and get those in the ground. I wanted to share with you, yesterday we had a conversation with BRK's CEO, and BRK is a company that works in water and sanitation in Brazil, and they were talking about a project that they had, a concession in lower income markets, where the investments they made and the interventions they made actually helped reduce deaths from waterborne diseases from 3,000 a year to 100 a year over a 7-year period. And the co-benefits were really significant because since children were no longer sick as much, they were able to go to school and be in school, which improved the education rate from an index of 4.8 to 5.3 in a measurement of 6. And then because the rivers were cleaner, they started to see markets developing and commercialization along the riverfront. So it brought economic benefits as well. And I wanted to share that story because a lot of times in the urban sectors, people think of the private sector as the enemy, when really we are an important partner. Not the only partner in urban development, but an important partner. And I want to talk a little bit about how do cities capture the benefits that private sector can bring while still managing the oversight and keeping a little bit of control. So I wanted to start with Dr. Salam. As permanent secretary for the Ministry of Transport in Lagos, how do you decide what projects and solutions you should be implementing? How do you take the city from vision for, I think the vision that you have is creating a world-class intermodal integrated transport system, and how do you move that into implementation, and what are your biggest implementation challenges?
Thank you very much. First of all, the historical background is this: Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. It has 36 states, of which Lagos State is the smallest, covering total land mass of about 3.5 of the whole land of Nigeria. It has the highest population of over 25 million. And the only thing we can do is we have a vision. Our vision is to provide a safe, efficient, effective, and affordable public passenger transport to this population that can be of economic value to them. In doing this, we develop strategies which we have in the master plan. We call it Strategic Transportation Master Plan, of which we have 14 corridors of BRT, 6 rail lines, 1 monorail, 3 cable cars corridor, 26 water routes, and several strategic route projects to be implemented. In doing so, we have timeline for all this, and we are thinking of, say, maybe about, an average of $20 billion to do all these projects. Strategy to go about achieving these projects is that we have, each of these projects has got a marketing document ready to go. You have an issue of PPP, just as rightly said. When you want to bring in private sector, they should be able to synergize with the state government. If not so, there's a fear of whether or not. Then we have laws that are appealing to investors to come over. We have the state is investment friendly, but the challenges we are having, one of it is funding, attracting the right investors, and then capacity building.
Thank you. I wanted to invite our other two panelists to help us think through what are your reflections and challenges?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. With regards to the representative of the Ministry of Transport in Nigeria, I would say that in Dakar we're working with the Executive Council of Urban Transportation, which is working with local governments and the Senegalese government to tackle issues related to urban mobility. We have what we call the BRT, the Rapid Transfer Bus System, and the director of this council said it in a session. We are aiming for modernizing the transportation sector of Dakar, and we have 82.2 square kilometer where we have a lot of people living. So Dakar is a very populated city, so there are huge needs when it comes to transportation. We also need infrastructure, and those infrastructures that are already existing are located in a single area. So we are striving to have the same program in Dakar.
You need a strong political support and political commitment with a vision that is very important for leading any process of change inside the city, inside the state. And I want to highlight the importance of a smart mix between internal resources and external resources. Because inside the government, we know in Cordoba, we know that we will not be able to know it all. Consequently, we are humble enough so as to ask for the best practices, and that is why, for instance, we many times require IFC assistance to run studies, to bring best practices, to tell us how the world is developing in certain things. And the other important part is not only ask for external advice, but also to empower the people that you have inside the government, because public sector needs that you pay attention to the public servants that you have inside the government, and that you learn also from them. Because if you're going to impose something from outside, that it's not going to work. It is a smart combination of both that allows you to implement changes.
Well, that's great. So I heard a lot about planning, strategies, the proper regulations, bringing in the right partners. Mr. Silla, I wanted to talk to you. Senegal's had quite a history of decentralization with some notable events in 1996 and 2004. So what is the role of the municipal government now? You can speak about mobility and sanitation, for example, and how do you work with other levels of government and other partners to get things done?
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Regarding sanitation and mobility, you wouldn't see it in the competencies transferred to local governments. But in the city of Dakar, we believe that we can do more and have stakeholders on board. Let me give you the example of a retention basin that has been put in place in Dakar to tackle the issue of flooding in the area of Grand Dakar. We want to use this basin as an urban mechanism and transform this area that is not very attractive to an area that could help populations. So we have a sort of project where we put forth the minister in charge of urban hydraulics, and alongside the ONAS, the Sanitation Office of Dakar, and in coordination with other relevant services in urbanization and transportation, we have this project that is being implemented. And we want to have in place a partnership, an international partnership to fund this project, and we are currently having discussions.
What are your reflections on this?
In Argentina, we have a federal system of organization. So we have 24 jurisdictions, and in order to implement a public policy, you have the municipal level, the state level, and the federal level. And consequently, that is quite a challenge to be coordinating all those efforts in order to be efficient enough and effective enough. But I think that the key aspect for coordination is to pay attention to be mature with institutions, because that will allow you to have dialogue. And that's always important, because you will be able to hear what the town has to say, what the state has to say, and what the federal government also has to say. So through dialogue, you're going to learn a lot. And that is something that we have learned in Argentina. You cannot only have one voice. If only one is speaking, there's no dialogue there. There's no progress. There's no partnership possible if you cannot interact in a mature way. So I think that that's a key aspect.
Thank you. Dr. Salam.
Yes, I wonder why decentralization. Because
you can't divulge environment from transportation. Whenever the city is dirty and it rains, it goes into the drain, it creates flood, and whenever there is flood, free movement or free flow of transport is impeded. But if you decentralize for specialization, it's good, but you specialize to coordinate the environment and the activities. That's what you should do.
That's great, thank you. I want to now turn to Roque. So as Secretary of Finance, Argentina has experienced quite a bit of turmoil over the last few years. You've got inflation of 48%, devaluation of the peso against the dollar of more than 100%. How do you manage to get the finances, and how do you keep that stable to fund your capital investment plans in the middle of such volatile macroeconomic conditions?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. It's an interesting question. And again, thanks IFC for bringing Latin American voices to this wonderful continent and to this wonderful country. And the question, it's an interesting question. And we tackle it by saying that we have to provide stability in the middle of volatility. And that is why we devote a lot of time to strategic planning. The province of Córdoba has devoted a lot of time for that, and that is why we have certain aspects we pay close attention to. One of them is to be competitive and to attract investments from all over the world. In order to do that, we need to be transparent and we need to be responsible for accountability. It is the only state in Latin America that has engaged to include under the GRI methodology all the management process. So we have our integrated report, not only telling what we are doing financially speaking, but also telling investors and stakeholders what we do in terms of environmental issues and in terms of social aspects. And that is key. We also try to be predictable when it comes to fiscal performance. We have had more than 15 years of operating surplus, and that is something that is not the case in many countries and in many states in Latin America. But it is the only way to be predictable, to run the administration efficiently. We also know and study a lot what our competitive advantages are, and that is why we devote our infrastructure plan to that. We invest in gas pipelines, we invest in aqueducts, in highways, we invest in things that are related to our economic metrics. And that implies a lot of studies and a lot of effort and a lot of hard work. But being predictable is what helps people from all over the world identify that you're a place where you can run your business easily. And another very important point of being competitive and predictable and to provide stability is to engage with strategic partners. And that is why I want to highlight the significant and important role that IFC has had with the province of Córdoba. In Argentina, where many times the financial and capital markets, they close, it's important to develop this relationship with multilateral institutions such as IFC. For sure, we have had strong negotiations because we need to have them, and it is okay. But the outcome of the relationship with IFC has been fantastic. We have invested in the transport sector, and now we are in a logistic development plan in which IFC has played a significant role. And I think that's important because through the AB loans, we were able also to attract private banks to join the projects, and that has been important. So being predictable, being efficient when running your administration, knowing where to invest, your capital expenditure should be directed toward your strategic planning and getting the right partners. I think that's the way in which you serve volatility.
Because private capital is a coward, right? I think we heard that this morning, so the most stability that you can bring, the better. Dr. Salam, how is it in Lagos?
Yes, I think on what the gentleman from Argentina said, the little I studied about them was that after the Falkland War, that would be okay for them. If not so, the capital, most of the loans they want to take are on the capital intensive nature, and then the rate of return and the bargaining power of the people that will pay this back in form of revenue, they may not have it there. So they should open up more.
Oui, sous ce registre, au-delà
In this respect, beyond the fact that Senegal is a stable country and the business environment is made to attract investors, the city of Dakar has decided to be assessed. Most of this assessment was subjected to some states, and the city did it. The recommendations that stemmed out of this assessment were rapidly implemented at technical and financial level. Now, the first outcome that we got, we were the first country to have a sovereign rating to finance some of the development in the city. The next thing is that we been rated by Bluefield, which I believe is the representatives of Standard & Poor in West Africa. So the city of Dakar is still being rated for investors to have confidence and trust in the city of Dakar. So this is an experience that that was not conclusive to start a loan in the African market to fund the solution of a problem relating to public space, but also the issue of mobility and also the wandering peddlers in the city of Dakar.
What we're hearing speaks to the fact that really good urban development has lots of areas of intervention. It starts with the regulatory side, and it's a complex weave of bringing in federal government, municipal governments, the private sector, civil society, to make sure that you're building things that that citizens need, that are going to serve their needs over a long period of time, and that are resilient to change. I wanted to ask each of you the same question. Can you give us an example of where the private sector was able to help address citizens' needs in an urban challenge, whether it be through bringing private finance or bringing innovation into each of your cities? Dr. Salam, I'll start with you.
Yes. The first BRT that was established in Lagos was carried out by the private sector. And presently, again, we've got about other 3 BRTs that are private sectors also moving in out of the 14. But being an investment-friendly state, we have given out areas like 13 routes for the ferries, of which none is coming up. So Lagos is open in another 2-3 weeks now. There's going to be expression of interest in the paper. We want people to come around, to come and invest in ferry. We have our lines there, the green lines available. We are presently working on blue and red line, private sector too. The other 4 lines are available. Let them come in, come and invest in it. The IFC can also guarantee this loan and bring in investors. We have our PPP law, everything ready. But I must confess here that we need capacity build-up in this area, just as he has rightly said, so that the federal government and you'll be able to work with the civil servant, so that if you come up with your own consultant and there is no person to supervise them, it's going to be like a Baba Shia no movement. So, yeah.
I think that's a really great point. I think the more that private sector moves into urban sectors and starts to provide services, you're going to see a bit of a shift in the role of governments in terms of being less of an implementer and more of an overseer and a regulator to ensure that the right regulations and incentives exist, but also that the right checks and balances are there to ensure equitable services and access to services. Mr. Silla, what's your profession?
In this respect, I would say that in Dakar, we've been testing working with the private sector in the framework of a project which we call the paving of Dakar. It's a urban mobility project, but also for rainwaters. This project has allowed to have green continuities and developed spaces. Now, the technology was not mastered, was not harnessed. So we went to the private sector to have a mastered technology or the funding. Now, in this project, we had the funding, but we didn't have the technology. So we launched a call for bids at international level. It was won by a Burkinabe firm, and 2010, 2011, we implemented this project on the main avenues of the city.
Quick check. Are we going to be taking questions from the audience? I know we're way behind.
If I may intervene, Lisa, I think we should probably keep moving.
Okay.
Krishna, it looks like he has one question for you.
Okay.
Just one, thanks.
One question for the panelists. What can IFC offer and other multinationals do better to support cities? Let's just maybe do that.
Speed round.
Okay.
30 seconds.
I think that IFC is very well prepared. We have found a set of professionals that is far above the average of the other teams, and I think they have the ability to adapt to the needs that you have and to understand your needs. For sure, you have your regulations, your standards, your processes, but this ability to create a long-term relationship, that's a differential, because we have been able to talk together in a face-to-face relationship, identifying a roadmap of what to do, and not only financially speaking. That's something I want to highlight, because for sure the financial assistance is important, as I mentioned, when it comes to closed markets, but also the technical assistance has been very, very important for the province.
That's great. I promised I didn't pay him. Dr. Salah.
Yes, the opportunity is there in Lagos. Lagos State is a vast area for investors. And our strength is our population. So probably you're thinking of making your money within 5 years. You'll be lucky within 3 years you have make your money. And you still have extra 2 years to go with profit. So IFC can come in here to bring in investors, and with them we discuss.
Wonderful. Mr. Silla.
Yes. In the city, we have a strategic development plan with a whole array of projects. Currently, we need the IFC to discuss about a strategy for the implementation of these projects, because we have to select them based on priorities for the implementation of this project. So I believe that we've launched the call, so the city of Dakar has the potential and the human resources to work with a prestigious entity like the IFC.
Just on all of these comments, our approach with cities as an institution is in fact to try and bring this investment coupled with advisory services, and we are having conversations with all 3 of your cities, which I'm very proud to say. Just to wrap up, I wanted to go back to the fact that in order to really make progress in urban development, I mean, all of you as cities officials are working really hard in an environment of uncertainty and constant change. And it takes a lot of partners and civil society. It takes interventions at the top end, but as well as at the bottom end. It's about creating the right incentives and the right oversight. And I want to thank you all for bringing your ideas. Dr. Salam, Mr. Silla, Mr. Spitalieri. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so fascinating to hear about this tension that's really struck me between being stable and predictable, but also being able to change on a dime and adapt to the world that's changing so quickly. So I think there's a real tension there for all of these leaders to be able to do both, to, give out a reputation and a behavior of stability and predictability, but also be required to change on a dime when the world is changing so fast around us. So there's another tension that cities are experiencing, city leaders. Bupe, if you could put the slides up, please. Here's another tension. This is a photograph of South Africa. Take a look. Bupe, next slide, please. This is a photograph of India. Take a look. Next slide, please. Here we have Kenya. And one more, Bupe. And this is Mexico. We've talked earlier today about how a picture is worth 1,000 words. Seeing is believing. Can anyone share with me what you see in these pictures? They have something in common. Salim.
Borders, and really scary borders.
Inequality.
Well, Jane just took my point. Total inequality. I live in Rio de Janeiro, and one of the wealthiest cities in the country. It's surrounded by the poorest population. This is really growing.
Dichotomous. Thank you so much. So, if you lived in one of those places, would you absolutely know what people on the other side of the wall were experiencing? So we're very fortunate to actually have the photographer, the artist with us today, Johnny Miller. And so just to find out sort of how he began this project, I'm going to go to our satellite office, over to you, Michelle, our CNN satellite, and just give us a quick 1-minute intervention with Johnny. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Johnny, for joining us. It's great to have you here. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
there you go. Thank you for having us, for being here. We're so excited. Through your photography, you've been able to have an intersection between your art, your technology, and a new way of information dissemination to raise awareness and call for action. So I wanted to hear from you when we were talking yesterday, what do you hope to transmit with these images and with your work with Unequal Scenes?
Thanks, everyone. Basically, I've got 3 reasons why I created this project. One, I really wanted to bring awareness to the hidden architectures, the processes, the systems that we may all take for granted, which clearly exist in our cities, that takes, as Mr. Morgan Landy pointed out in the very first session, a new perspective sometimes to see. Secondly, I wanted to facilitate conversations around what these photographs meant. You guys said it perfectly, inequality. And I'm so happy that all of us, leaders of industry, government, civil society, are sitting here right now talking about inequality. I think that's really, really powerful. And then lastly, offer solutions. And I can't do the last part on my own. I've done a lot of work through this project to learn what the drivers of economic inequality are, what wealth discrepancy looks like. You know, I see the role of an artist sometimes to be a time traveler. So to reveal the past histories of where we've come from, to hold up a mirror on what our current societies look like, but then also to imagine new futures. And I'd really like all of you to sort of help me through that last process, to help imagine new futures, because I think people in this room can really do that, actually.
Thank you, Johnny and Michelle. Thank you so much. Our next speakers, come on up. Let's give Johnny a round of applause.
On this table.
And now we're going to talk about water.
Good morning.
I was imagining the water systems in those cities, Sergita.
Exactly. Can you hear me? Is it working? Okay, great. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the session on water and sanitation, innovative solutions for closing the demand delivery gap. My name is Yogita Mamsen. I'm with the World Bank's, I'm the World Bank's manager for water for West Africa and Central Africa. It's an honor to be here moderating the session with you. Yesterday we had a session on energy where we looked at the challenges and opportunities for investing and bringing services to those most in need. Now we're going to speak about those challenges and opportunities related to water. I'm a bit biased, although I've also worked on energy, and I would say the challenges related to water are even greater, what we in the World Bank call wicked problems. So why would I say the challenges for water are particularly wicked, which require all of us to work together to solve them? Well, water falls from the sky, the rain falls from the sky. We see it in the oceans and the rivers. People think it's God-given, and there are many who think it should be free or not very expensive, low cost, if any cost. So it's a wicked problem to have tariffs be somewhat cost-reflective. Another challenge is that it's a public good. There are positive externalities related to water. Lisa just gave this example about Brazil and the health and the business. And what that means, for example, with sanitation, is the benefits to you as an individual are often less than the benefits, or just a small set of the benefits to society. And therefore, you may not be willing to pay that full cost. Yet for society, the benefit is worth paying for that cost. So there's a question of subsidies coming in, smart subsidies. And that's a wicked problem, to get those subsidies as efficient and minimal as possible and well-targeted. And then finally, especially in the regions that I cover, water is a finite resource everywhere, and it's growing increasingly scarce. We say sometimes it's not enough, and then when it comes, there are floods and it's too much. But it's a finite resource. And this, yes, we have desalination, we're coming up with innovative solutions to augment the resource, but ultimately we have this grave challenge. And with population growth, with increasing poor water quality, and of course climate change, the challenge with regarding to the resources getting tougher. So where do we all fit in? Where does the bank fit in? The World Bank is the public sector arm of the World Bank Group. And we work largely with public sector clients, with governments, but we're recognizing that it takes many more to tackle this challenge. The World Bank is working closer with IFC. I myself was at IFC last year in Morgan's department and had a great experience over the year. And we need to work more with others as well. The World Bank's role is much more on the enabling environment space when it comes to bringing in other partners, working on institutions, laws, regulations, sort of the governance framework, those easy things. And also financial sustainability, looking at questions of tariffs and other forms of financing, major challenges. But together with IFC, but also government at all levels, communities, community organizations, research institutions, and of course the private sector coming together to meet this challenge. So I presented a little picture of slightly doom and gloom, but luckily we have panelists who are out there coming up with solutions, confronting challenges, coming up with solutions on how to tackle these large challenges. And we're going to have a series of 5-minute sort of TED Talks before we go into a panel. And the first speaker will be Teresa Vernaglia, the CEO of BRK Ambiental. And Teresa will speak a bit about the experience in Brazil. So over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Rita. Good morning, everyone. And first I needed to share with you that this is my first TED Talk experience. So while walking through the stage, I will try to do two things. Try to not fall from here and coordinate my ideas and pass the right message to all of you. So I am from BRK, which is a water and wastewater private company. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing our experience in Uruguayana, where we reduced from 3,000 to 100 cases of diarrhea in 7 years, investing in sanitation. And in Brazil, it's a country of contrast. We have children in urban area and also in the rural areas talking in phone, in most of the situations, is smartphones while step in the raw sewage. We have 35 million people, the entire population of Canada, without access to potable water. and amazing 100 million people, 0.5% of our population, in the 9th largest economy in the world without access to sewage. $150 billion roughly is required to overcome in the last years this challenge. And probably you may ask me, how is it possible? And how can we overcome this situation? So I will say to you that Brazil, as any other underdeveloped country, face the same situation. The local government cannot alone meet all the required investment. Private sector is part of solution through PPPs, concession, and even privatization. But also the private sectors need to have legal certainty, predictability, scale projects, and IFC long-term finance to perform all the investments. But what I wanted to share with you today is not what we are doing in Brazil to try to make a more favorable environment for private. But I'm going to share with you what we are doing with the investment we are doing right now, with the concessions that we have right now, under the rules that we have right now. We are serving 15 million people all over Brazil, 180 municipalities. Brazil has 6,000. So we are pretty slow, but we are the largest private. And we performed last year a survey to figure out what was the impact of lack of water and sanitation in the women's lives. We brought the lens of gender for this sector. And we figured out with facts and data that women without a bathroom, and we have around 4 million without a bathroom in Brazil, the women without access to this basic service earns 70% less other women that has bathroom. So can we imagine it when compared to men's, what happens with this income? So we try to develop and reshape our sustainable projects to better connect with this community, with the women's, and figure out how we can transform their lives through the investment that we are doing. And we understand that first, most of these women, that's more than half of our customers, most of them lives on low-income regions. So how can we help them to have enough resource to connect their homes to our networks? And afterwards, how we can help them to have income to pay a monthly bill. So this is the challenge that we have to overcome. So, and how are we doing that? Making partnerships with companies that has the same proposal that we have, that transform lives of people, and helping us to provide credits for these families to connect. So we are discussing and having a partnership with Gary from water.org on this, but we also are developing training for prepare women to be plumbers. And so they are going to have a profession and be employed in BRK or in any other company surrounding where they live. So I would say that sanitation is a very good business. We can make money investing in sanitation, but more than that, sanitation is a cause, is a purpose, is an amazing combination of doing business and making the lives of people better. So thank you very much for your time.
you, Teresa. Next, we have Walid Madwar, who's the Vice President of Business Development for Matito, based in the UAE. And he's going to speak to the challenges related to preparing large infrastructure investment projects.
Yes.
Welcome, Walid.
Hi. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Teresa, you're not the only one doing the TED talk show. First time as well. Okay. My name is Walid Madwar. I work in Matito company. We develop water, wastewater across the emerging market in Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And I was involved in all of this business development in this geography. Recently, last 5 years, I've been involved in Africa and still the Middle East. And always I have this very funny discussion with my boss and the board. What is the pipeline of projects in Africa? We don't see much. And for me, yes, there isn't much projects, and there are many reasons why there isn't. And this is what I'd like to share, my point of view. I could be right, could be missing many things, but just thought to share it with you. The first thing that comes to my mind is why the government, their mindset is very stubborn. They don't want to let go the power, the control from the water sector, from under their control to the private sector. There is no political will, and I see that there is a lot of stubbornness to control, maintain the power from the government, that they cannot really manage the water sector well, efficient, like the private sector. So I see that the first thing is just to ask them, and I've been through that with many government sectors across Africa and other areas as well, and the same classic problem. The second point is the structure of the ministries of water. Are they accountable to audit, to balance sheet, to are they doing good, bad? No, they're not. So they don't care most of the time. This drives to the second point, that there is no willingness. Is this project affordable? Water, as you mentioned earlier, is you can find in rain, river, many places. Yet it is not available for people. Is it affordable? How much would it cost? For example, we just give you some data about Saudi Arabia, where they're privatizing everything in Saudi right now. And part of the privatization, they had to come up with what is the cost of water, and it turned out to be $1.35 US. This is including high brackish well, desalination, and surface water. So average out with subsidy of the fuel cost. Yet now the private sector is involved in Saudi, and it's about 50 US cents per cubic meter. So there's huge mismanagement, there's huge gap happening. In the wastewater projects, it is, right now there are several bids. We were lucky to secure one in Saudi for wastewater, and it is 50% tariff compared to O&M contract alone. So there is huge mismanagement, and they don't want to admit, the government, and they don't want to let go the power. That's really an issue, or that's the biggest challenge that we face, or I face myself in the market. It comes to the two important points that I'd like to mention, or to share with you, and I'm open for discussion, is the tariff affordable of the water sector? And once it is not affordable, there are many issues. And is it politicized? So working in many projects, and there is, at the end, there is huge U-turn, and you are back to square one, because the tariff is not affordable, the tariff is politicized, and you just cannot do much about it, or at least the private sector just cannot come in. Part of the affordability I see is the non-revenue water, where there is a loss in the system, and if you are lucky in the area of Africa and other areas as well, if you are 50%, you're lucky. So whatever you produce, whatever is received and billed and collected is about 50% maximum. So that's really makes it a big challenge for the private sector to come in. Lastly, and I'll make it very fast, are these projects bankable? can we really bring the lenders and put all their stringent conditions on the government to make it, to get the payment guarantees, the control, the inflation, and the currency protection. All of that, it is another challenge for us to come in, and that's always the answer that I tell the board, which they don't like. But thank you very much for your time.
Very good.
Quick one.
Thank you, Walid, for that perspective. Speaking from the World Bank perspective, where we work largely with public sector clients, as I mentioned, it's a very wicked problem, and there are many different ways to solve this problem. No one right solution, and we all need to come together to do this. It's a tough load that needs to be managed. So next we have Khadija Simboro. She will speak to youth solutions and local solutions to reach those off-grid. And for those of you who've been listening in English, we'll be switching into French. Thank you.
Merci Yogita.
Merci à vous.
Je suis Khadija Semboro.
My name is Khadija Semboro. I'm from Burkina Faso. I'm the Director General of Farafina Eco Engineering, which is a social company that develops solutions and products for access to energy, water, and sanitation services. We try to work with communities to develop with them solutions to meet their needs. In terms of sanitation, in Burkina Faso, we have about 20% of access to sanitation, and when you move to rural areas and urban areas, the need is higher. Where we have a community and people who have installed there without any structuring, and there is no real urban planning in those areas, and the government is finding it difficult to provide sanitation services. Besides that, we have governmental projects as well as projects led by NGOs to provide access to sanitation to communities. But these projects are focused on building toilets, and we usually forget everything related to water waste. So we find ourselves in situations where we have small or tiny toilets and no sanitation network in order to have an adequate sewage system. We have tried to work with the community to develop a technology that combines both the toilet and the sewage system. So be able to reuse this water waste once it's recycled, and also promote a sort of value chain to reuse fecal sludge. And we received an award from the Ministry of Sanitation and the Water Agency, USAID, that have given this project an award for its success. What is most important for us is to work in collaboration with communities. And with all the projects, we have this community engagement dimension in order to be able to meet their needs. For example, for the sanitation project, it will be difficult to ask a community to contribute financially speaking, because we know that they have problems with housing and daily living conditions, so it's difficult for them to build their own toilets. What we do is to work with investors who are looking for social impact and facilitate their access to toilets and sanitation services. One part of the project is funded by the community households, and those households provide a personal contribution by participating in the building process of the toilets, and so they contribute in nature. So local workforce, if I want, for instance, to build a toilet for a household, we will have a friend, a brother or a cousin from that family who will come and participate. So for us, it's to work locally in contribution with the beneficiaries. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Merci ici Khadija. Khadija est la directrice de Farafina.
Khadija is the director of Farafina Eco Engineering.
Gary White is the CEO of water.org, and he's going to speak to the current barriers and obstacles for reaching the last mile users.
Great. Thank you,
Welcome,
Gita.
Gary.
Good morning. So it's always interesting to see how themes start to develop at conferences like this, and one that seems to be emerging today is like capital being a coward. And so in the last few minutes I've been reflecting on that and how do I explain what water.org does. And I think the best way to sum it up is we help capital get more courageous. So we're in the courageous capital business. So hopefully that'll resonate today. And what I wanted to do is to ask some what ifs. What if we saw people living in poverty not as a subsidy or charity problem to be solved, but instead a market to be served? Or what if, when we look at generating bankable deals and capital and how that can come into solving these wicked problems, what if we saw that capital resource coming as much from the bottom up as it does from the top down with big infrastructure investment? So I want to keep those questions kind of in the back of our mind as we think about this today. But for me, my personal journey is I've really focused my whole life, ever since I was in university up until now, on this intersection between people living in poverty and access to water and sanitation. And that journey has led me in a lot of different directions. I think that there's certainly a need for us to have like direct impact where, as we just heard, there's communities that are so poor that they need that type of subsidy from the bottom up, those in extreme poverty. But also, if we look at the problem as a whole, we know that there's never going to be enough charity in the world to get access to water and sanitation for everyone. So let's look at the problem a little bit differently. And as I went through my career with this, what became clear to me in talking to people in community after community, slums, villages, is that they're already paying for water. They're paying huge amounts of money and capital and health for water. When you think about it, today everyone in the world who woke up had water from somewhere. The question is, how much did they have to pay for that, oftentimes in the form of cash, or how far did they have to walk for that in terms of their time, or what's the cost they're paying for that in terms of their health? So we see that as we've gone through this, that the key to this was helping people get access to affordable finance so that they could get the water and sanitation solutions that were best for their households. And in the spirit of collaboration, what we said is we're not going to go out and provide those loans ourselves. What we're going to do is help them get access through microfinance and other types of financial institutions so that we can give those capital providers the courage to lend into the base of the pyramid. And that's what in the Philippines, in Manila, a slum around Manila, who took out one of these loans from one of our local partners. And we've worked with more than 100 of these finance partners around the world now. She used that loan so that she could get a water connection at her home. It was about $300 to $400, I don't remember the exact amount, but basically that allowed her to pay the connection fee to the utility so that she could get this water. Prior to that, she was paying $60 a month to a water vendor for the water that her household needed. With this loan and the payments on that loan combined with her water tariff, she's now paying $10 a month. So you can see there's this huge amount of inefficient capital in the system sloshing around. I was working with the Global Agenda Council on Water and Sanitation with the World Economic Forum, and those coping costs that are built in, the health, the time, the cash, all that adds up to about $200 to $300 billion a year. So the concept is like, how can we redirect this in new ways so that we can leverage this capital? So you fast forward now, with water credit, we've catalyzed about $1.7 billion in these small loans for people at the base of the pyramid. They're repaid at a 99% rate. right? And more than 80% of the borrowers are women. So we see this really scaling up and working. And now what we've also done is launch a separate entity, an impact investment asset manager, Water Equity, that now instead of using just philanthropy, which is still important to this, and de-risking, but we're also bringing in investment capital from the US and Europe, providing investors a financial return while also getting a social impact so we can scale up the water credit model. And we're also now working with the IFC to create a credit enhancement facility that will actually scale this up even further with commercial financial institutions, starting in India and then spreading out to countries around the world. So what I see is those what-if questions actually are already answered. And I think that what we can do today is go into much more detail how people can get involved as investors and as utilities and as government to scale it all up. Thank you.
So if I could ask the panelists to all come up. So now we're going to have a chance to take questions from the audience for any of the panelists. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, can go now. Let's go.
I think we need a mic.
Bonjour, je suis Rachel.
Good morning, my name is Rachel Camara. I'm the country director of CICI in Guinea. CICI is the Center for Study and International Cooperation.
Je suis Rachel.
I am Rachel Honorine Camara, the country director of CICI in Guinea. It's a Canadian NGO, Center for Study and International Cooperation. I would like to thank IFC for this occasion to reflect on the issue of water and sanitation because it's very problematic in all our cities and our rural areas, and particularly Guinea, where I'm from. For those who know the country, it's been repeated extensively since yesterday. IFC is an institution that has a sort of position and standard and helps share experience from country to country. So my question is as follows. I'm very much impressed by the experience of Madame Khadija, and given that we are faced with challenges in Guinea in management of wastewater, and the same goes for other African cities. Now, what is the project or the perspectives on IFC standpoint to replicate that in other countries, because it's a successful experience? So what are you thinking of? What do you have in the pipeline? We talked about boreholes, but we didn't talk about waste, solid waste. Do you also have success stories in solid waste? Because we need this system in Guinea.
Good morning. Yes, hi. My name is Roberto Frau. I am a social specialist. My question is for Teresa. I didn't know about the company that you represent. I think it's really interesting. I work a lot in Brazil, and a lot of the industrial clients that I work with want to work on sanitation with the communities in their area of influence. But of course, it's not their core business, and they don't know what they're doing, to be honest. And so finding the right partnerships that aren't only with municipal governments. I mean, municipal governments can be good partners, but I think companies like yours could really be sort of the right, the right know-how, have the right know-how. What are some of the challenges that you find in being able to work with large industrial companies that want to do community investment and don't necessarily have in-house know-how to implement these kind of projects?
Okay, we'll take one more and then we'll...
Hello, my name is Monica Ospina, and my question goes straight to you, Khadija. Most of the time we invest at the very first part and everybody in the community gets excited. You mentioned the model that they helped as part of labor, but the long term is the maintenance, and that's what guarantees the sustainability of the solutions and the quality of the water they will access. So how do you guys are addressing that long-term commitment of the community to keep it clean and forever?
All very great questions. So maybe actually we'll go backwards. Khadija, do you want to start?
Ok. Oui, pour nous, en fait...
As I said, in our country, the community takes part in building the toilets. So it's providing workforce. And they participate in the instruments that are used. They're also trained when it comes to maintaining the facility afterwards. Our strategy, globally speaking, is when we go to a community, we start with training and sensitization, because very often we do not feel or have a sense of the needs in the community. We've seen projects where toilets have been built in communities where they won't use it afterwards because they didn't need it. So what we try to see is to assess the impact afterwards. How has their lives been impacted? And in our company, the average age of our staff members is 24 years, and we try to develop best practices among the youth community when it comes to water management and sanitation. Those young people are representatives of NGOs, local governments, etc., and they benefit from training. And after the training, there is a challenge. The challenge is to see how they exercise the theory in real life. And we call them ambassadors, ambassadors of water, economy, and energy. And when we call them an ambassador, it means that they have to embody the spirit that we are trying to convey. And there is a sort of peaceful challenge between those ambassadors to make sure that they convey the message, they carry out what is needed from them as activities, and they sensitize communities. And at the end of the project, we have a sort of gathering where we give awards to those ambassadors, and what we are striving for is now to replicate our project in other countries, and that starts with sensitization.
On discussing about this with the industry or the industrial customers, what we do have is much more with the local authorities, at the municipal level. But what we are seeing is more and more that the scarcity of water is pushing the industrial to look for alternatives, like reuse water, and also how to better use it, the water that they have in their production chain. But I see that this is a potential market, but at least in Brazil at this moment, I think that we do not have any experience in leading with the industrial on this behalf.
Alors, à la première question, I'm going to pass the mic to George Butler, who can explain a little bit more about what IFC is doing in terms of lessons learned and sharing lessons, especially in Africa. George.
Thanks very much, Yugita, and thanks for the question. Look, I'm going to deal with it in three parts. And the first, Gary has already mentioned about IFC providing funding, so I won't expand on that. The second is that IFC invests in private sector companies. So, for example, in Aegea in Brazil, we've helped them to extend the the number of clients served from about 2 million to 7 million. And we've been talking to Teresa about BRK and what we could do to support that tremendous initiative in sanitation. But in Africa, and I think the question was predominantly on Africa, the answer is not enough. We are not doing enough. We would like to do a lot more, and as people have said, the need is huge. But what we have done is initiated this Water Innovation Platform for Africa, WIPA, and this is to bring new technologies to utilities in Africa. We work with the African Water Association based in Abidjan, and we regularly have a forum where we bring new technologies into African utilities. But the bottom line is not enough. There's still a huge need. Thanks, Yogita.
Thank you. And if I could just take the opportunity of sitting here. Gary, could you explain a little bit what water.org is doing with IFC?
Sure. So what we see is, bringing the base of the pyramid into the conversation. And I mentioned earlier the $1.7 billion in capital that's gone out to household level loans. More than half of that has gone to households where people are making less than $2 a day. About 70% are people under $4 a day. So the whole concept of investing in infrastructure and capital and is trying to make sure that capital finds the base of the pyramid and doesn't just serve the more affluent areas. So with IFC, I think we bring kind of that 30-year history of water.org into understanding the market at the base of the pyramid so that we can team with IFC, again, to bring courage to those financial institutions in the countries where we're working. So the concept is that, yes, we have an evidence base of 21 million people getting access to water and sanitation through loans versus charity, and we have mobilized all this capital, yet the financial institutions still have a little bit of cowardly capital. And so how do we de-risk this for them just enough so that they would say, okay, we will now invest in these loan portfolios that are targeting the base of the pyramid because the numbers add up. And I think that's what we're trying to do. With Water Equity as an asset manager, we have about $60 million of assets under management right now that are being invested in not just finance, but the enterprises, the businesses, the fecal sludge management companies that serve the base of the pyramid as well. So we see that continuing to scale up. So we see the investment capital coming externally through social impact investing, but we also see it coming internally from the financial institutions in the countries where we work, and that's where IFC's coming in to help us get the structure right so that capital will flow to people living in poverty.
Great. Do we have time to take a few more questions, Arjun? Yes. Okay.
We were also disciplined with our 5 minutes. We get more time.
I'm coming. We'll work our way down this table. This table is activated. I love
the gentleman was, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, hello. I'm Arvo Gonzalez. I'm with USAID. So when discussing integrating, I guess, particularly sanitation into communities that don't have sanitation access, it seems as if there's something gained by gaining sanitation, granted, but it seems like there was an additional incentive to find a use for what is collected as a result of the sanitation service. So I'm referring to the circular sanitation economy, which I apologize for bringing up before lunch. But along those lines, what are the things that donors or communities can do to help the private sector to also for financing or just for technological innovation, explore how to make the most out of the potential or in some cases rudimentary value chain that already exists with the provision of sanitation services?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Wendy Tyrrell from the Development Partner Institute. At the risk of complicating an already complicated space, there's a nexus between energy and water, a very strong nexus, and it would be very interesting to hear your perspectives on how you're thinking about the relationships between energy and water in terms of advancing access to both. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rami Narte. I'm from the Global Water Partnership, working on private sector engagement all across the board. And I'm very interested, I was going to ask about integration, but now I'll move on to ask you, given the wickedness of this problem, what is the one solution, well, I mean, there are many solutions to that wicked problem, but is one solution that you really believe in going forward?
Okay, great. So we'll start with the water energy nexus. Could
yes.
you?
Yeah. Okay. Recently, I would say the past few years that people start linking water and energy efficiency. And I've seen some initiatives in some projects that you have to have an energy efficient system, let's say solar or renewable energy, to supplement and reduce the power cost of the treatment, whether desalination or water or wastewater. Yet, it's not yet has been efficient 100%, but there has been some projects, mainly I've seen it in the Middle East and in Saudi Arabia especially, and there has been a link, or there is the element of renewable energy, it's a must, to supplement and reduce the power cost. So this initiative has started already in between water and power in PPP projects. So an issue, there are some challenges. It's not, you can do it easily. There is no storage for, or it's a bit costly, the storage of power, and area availability. So there are some elements that at the end restrict how much power element you can have to reduce the power cost of the water treatment. So,
great, thank you. Teresa, could you take the question on sanitation and the circular economy and incentivizing different aspects of the value chain?
Yes.
I'm paraphrasing the question.
Okay. I think that we are trying, for example, to connect the company with this type of donations and the people that really want to transform the reality of sanitation. And what we are seeing is that from one side we have this interest on share investments, but it's unclear how to make that happen really, how to put a project in place, how we will measure the effectiveness of that project, and how we are going, based on the results, bring more funding for attend the base of Parliament. So this is our day-to-day challenge we are having. So what we are trying to do is be as transparent as possible to open the doors of our company and have people dedicated to discuss with this institution and try to think what better fits to our reality, because the weakness in the infrastructure is the same, it's pretty similar, but the reality of each country is completely different. So the culture, the way that the people perceive the lack of this infrastructure. So in Brazil, what we are trying is how we can find the better projects and the better way to measure fits in the reality that we have in Brazil. And as we are a very large country, the reality in the north is completely different from the south. So not exactly we can have a scalable project using this resource, because we needed to design accordingly to what will really works on each region. So I think that this is the main challenge we are facing. But the good thing is more and more we see that in other investors and donors company, they really are interested in how to overcome the situation, so they are open to discuss. It's going to take some time, but we really need to find our way yet. So we have some projects that we still needed to put in place to see how they are going to come.
Just a quick follow-up on that. the circular sanitation economy. And the challenge, I think, is still that there are not bankable deals out there in terms of like trying to turn, what people say, poop into gold, right? It hasn't been happening so much. And so I think because it is such a public good, there is room for the public sector to step in and try to stimulate that and try to find ways, concessions or other types of incentives for that to happen to get the fecal sludge managed. We, at Water Equity, our investment committee met just last week, and we just green-lighted an investment in that type of company. But I can tell you, it took a long time to find that type of deal to make sure that the investors will actually get repaid. One other quick follow-up on the energy is the whole carbon footprint of our sector is immense. If you look at California, 25% of all electricity in that state goes to sourcing, treating, and delivering water. It's a massive carbon footprint, and it's not dissimilar around the world. And then you juxtapose that with the fact that in some utilities, half of the water is lost and unaccounted for. Just think about the carbon footprint that's happening in the world that doesn't even need to happen because of all that wasted water. So I think we are not telling our story nearly well enough to climate mitigation. We talk a lot about adaptation, but we've got to tell the story better about climate mitigation and how better infrastructure and water is going to contribute to that, and that can leverage, I think, more investment.
Great, thank you. Yes,
Pour revenir un peu sur la question par rapport au...
To come back to the issue on nexus between water and energy, for countries like our country, the density in urban and urban areas, it's very weak. So it's difficult to have production systems from an area to another and be able to transport it and give access to remotest areas. So I'm thinking of isolated autonomous systems. We had a solar pumping system that has been installed in a community, and it was very successful. When I was doing the presentation, I was saying that our company works in the sector of water and energy, and today we are doing solar system distribution on a pay-as-you-go basis. So why not having a pumping system with this model? Because the solar systems that we are distributing are targeting households. Before, people were using these systems because they could recharge their phones, use their TV, etc., and increase their income-generating activities and develop them. For instance, hair salons and laundromats. So a system that is used for TV is more attractive. And a client told me that because I have TV in my hair salon, I receive more clients. So this also contributes to income generating activities in the communities. So why not have a pumping system, a solar pumping system in villages and communities that will be managed by villagers? From what I've read, when you have such facilities that are given to communities, maintenance is not something that is carried out adequately. So why not have solar pumping systems that will be managed and maintained by private entities, and we'll have a pay-as-you-go system behind. Again, we will need investors who would agree to invest in such solar pumping system because it's quite costly for communities.
So we have to put through, and looking at that aspect of the wish, is one challenge that you would like to solve, and you get one word. So what comes to mind when you think of your choice, biggest challenge, biggest wish in tackling the water and sanitation, let's just say SDGs or wishes of our countries and people. So one word?
Trillion.
Trillion.
And hopefully we can have like a one-sentence explanation. I think the water challenge is a $1 trillion challenge, and we're not nearly up to it in terms of the capital that's coming in. We have a $90 billion a year shortfall for SDG number 6, and the trillion is what it's going to take.
Great, thank you.
Resilience.
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 Thank you.
Partnership.
Partnership.
Développement de projets locaux par les
Local projects development by communities.
Thank you, Yogita, and all. Actually, it was beautiful how those final words summed up so much of our conversation over the last 2 days, not at all limited to water and sanitation. So thank you. You all are amazing. You have been through a marathon morning. You still have questions. You're still bright-eyed. You deserve a break. So we're going to take a break now. On va bouger un peu. It's time to go to the breakout rooms, but you have 20 minutes. So you can get your coffee, you can greet a friend, walk to the breakout room. But wait 1 sec. Take your headset with you. Take your headset with you if you would like translation. And then lunch will be from 1 to 2, same system as yesterday. And then we meet back here at 3:30. And again, the marketplace is open. If you prefer to shop rather than eat, some of us do, then you're welcome to engage in that. Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon.
Liga.